And Cuba, welcome to Front to South. On Thursday, a coalition of parliamentarians across Europe have written to Antonio Ramalho, CEO of the Portuguese bank Novo Banco, urging him to act in accordance with international law and release the funds in order to save the health and lives of Venezuelan children. On this matter, teleSUR speaks with David Adler, General Coordinator of the Progressive International. Welcome to teleSUR. How are you?
Thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be back on the show.
On what basis did the signatories of the letter demand that Novo Banco CEO release the amounts due to the Pan American Health Organization by Venezuela and deposit it in the Portuguese bank?
So since 2017, the Portuguese private bank, Novo Banco, has confiscated roughly $1.7 billion that belong to the Venezuelan government and specifically to Bandes, the Venezuelan Development Bank. That Portuguese bank, Novo Banco, I hasten to add, is only 25% owned by the Portuguese government, and it's 75% owned by a private equity firm based in the United States, based in Texas, called Lone Star Funds. So that's the broader context of the case that we're examining here. And of that $1.7 billion, the Venezuelan government, Bandes in particular, the development bank, is simply asking that they release roughly $12 million directly to the Pan American Health Organization to pay for over 13 million vaccines for polio, diphtheria, yellow fever, diseases like that often affect children hardest, and roughly 33 million syringes. The Pan American Health Organization has agreed to this payment. They're awaiting the transfer of funds, that small amount of funds, just 12 million of the 1.7 billion that is currently owed, directly from Novo Banco to the Pan American Health Organization. Once again, I emphasize, this is money that's never going to touch the hands of the Venezuelan government, that a Portuguese court has already ruled has no risk of embezzlement or money laundering, is already ring-fenced for the medicines, vaccines, syringes, medical equipment that I mentioned already to be sent directly to Venezuela. So we think this is a really neat encapsulation of the problem that sanctions or unilateral coercive measures, as they're called in arenas like the United Nations, pose to a country like Venezuela.
David, like you said, Novo Banco is majority owned by U.S. private equity firm Lone Star. Taking this into account, we ask you, to what extent would CEO Antonio Ramalho have the authority to release the Venezuelan funds? Does the letter sent to him have any binding character?
Well, certainly not. No, this is a collection of parliamentarians from across Europe who are taking up the case that has since been kind of abandoned by the international community to raise the alarm about the humanitarian consequences of those coercive, unilateral, and illegal sanctions imposed by the United States. Of course, Novo Banco is free to send this payment, both the Pan American Health Organization and the Portuguese government, which recognizes the government in Venezuela is capable of sending this money, but they have refused to respond, let alone comply with that request from Bandes in recent months.
In case the Novo Banco CEO doesn't accept to release the 10 million euros of the 1.7 billion the Portuguese bank keeps confiscated in order to pay to the Pan American Health Organization for over 13 million vaccines and 3 million medical syringes to the people of Venezuela, what are we talking about? Could we consider this a crime against humanity unfolding in Portugal pushed by the United States or not?
Strong reasons set out by even the Venezuelan government at the International Criminal Court for suggesting that these illegal and extreme sanctions imposed by the United States and other countries on Venezuela, and indeed on other countries who fall under the sanctions regime, do fall under war crimes legislation or crimes against humanity. The fact is that sanctions may be invisible, but they're no less a weapon of war, so we need to treat them as such. So I think that there's a question with Novo Banco, if they're not willing to comply with this request, then it is essential to continue to increase the pressure and continue to raise the profile of this case so that the clear humanitarian implications of these invisible sanctions are made evident and that there's accountability for the consequences for the thousands, even millions of children around the world who are impacted by these sanctions.
And David, last but not last, Venezuelan, or at last but not least, I meant, Venezuela's National Electoral Council and the European Union have recently signed an agreement for the deployment of an electoral observation mission of the EU for the regional and municipal elections to be held on November 21st. This statement sums up to the letter backing Venezuela's rights to its assets. Would this mean a change of perspective from the EU to Maduro's government and the Bolivarian Revolution?
Certainly not. I wouldn't want to overstate the extent to which the European Union has changed its position, both in terms of its economic relationship to Venezuela and in terms of its geopolitical relationship to the United States, which is where these sanctions originate. I do think there are signs of hope towards pursuing more diplomatic solutions to these problems, as opposed to the use of these extreme and illegal sanctions. However, I think it's critical that we're honest about where we're at in this process, which is still a quite extreme situation in terms of the sanctions that are suffocating, strangling, and blocking humanitarian access to humanitarian aid and medical equipment for the government and the people of Venezuela.
David, thank you very much.